Hey there, I'm Finn Deerhart, and I just want to chat for just a second about the ways in which we can use fantasy as a map into a deeper growth process for ourselves. We hear fantasy discussed, fantasy as far as our culture is concerned is a kind of, it's like a static, thing that kind of happens to us. It helps us be aroused. Maybe it's a narrative that we think of whenever we want to get off. Maybe it's like a deeply transgressive kind of place in ourselves that we feel shame about. Maybe it's some sort of like kink that we're wanting to explore. It could be just like a scenario that we remember over and over again that helps us feel aroused. It could be all kinds of things. And basically the nature of fantasy is that it is not just something that's passive and out there and it happens to us. It's actually something that comes from inside of our unconscious selves, and we project it in real time on to ourselves and onto the people with whom we're having sex, and just our day. It's how we imagine ourselves, how we imagine what's happening all around us is really an element of fantasy. So when we look at it in a sexual or a sexually behavioral kind of place, and it takes on a sexual imagery, what we're really looking at is, in the language of sexual actions and erotic impulses, we're looking at the language of our unconscious dynamics that we're really working out in the world. And what we experience in our sexual lives is often echoes of all the other places in our lives in which we have similar struggles, we have similar strengths, we have similar places within ourselves that are being activated. And if we think that, our fantasy, is this something I act out? Is it not? Do I want this? Do I not? And then we're kind of, that's one level of it. And that could be fun for us to act out a fantasy. Sometimes that can be really exciting. People that act on them often report that they're positive experiences. They can actually help relationships if you have the infrastructure and communication in place. Bringing in fantasy and acting on it it's reported that it improves relationship quality. But really what I'm trying to get at is that this layer beneath that is that our fantasies show us a map of what we're trying to work through on the planet. So when we're little kids, every single one of us, whether we had good parenting or sort of good parenting or terrible parenting or somewhere on the spectrum of that, we accumulate a lot of beliefs about ourselves and the world and what we are supposed to be doing and what we're worthy of. And those beliefs could be anything like, if I get too much attention, my mom feels kind of threatened, or if I listen to like my dad and talk about his sadness, like I'll never get away, or if I am my full self, other people are jealous of me. It could be anything. It could be it's some number of these sorts of beliefs, or I'm too much. I'm going to hurt people. I always hurt people. We form these beliefs and we start to live from them. And the experiences that we have really confirm those beliefs, and we disconfirm them sometimes. But basically we have this set of, emotional and feelings-based perceptions about ourselves that we carry into all of our interactions, including sex. So how fantasy works, because if we just walked into a sexual situation and thought, if I get too much attention, everyone's going to be upset and jealous, I'm going to be stiff and tense, or it's going to be, we experience as inhibitions, right? So I'm too much, or I hurt people, I want sex too much, or these kinds of beliefs, right? So these are experienced in the real moment. We're not thinking that when we're having sex. What we're actually experiencing often is a kind of like watching ourselves, spectating, that's called, or pulling away on the inside, or maybe losing sensation, losing the ability to stay focused and focused on and mindfully aware of our own sensations in our body and what we're experiencing emotionally. We might tend to track our other partner, like our partner's experience more than our own. And so that's how those beliefs start to be felt and be manifest. So what happens with fantasy, how that interacts, is that when we fantasize, or we project a fantasy onto the situation, maybe we imagine this guy that I'm fucking as a certain kind of person, or maybe I imagine myself as a certain kind of like power dynamic over him, or, people they question like the nature of BDSM fantasies or kink, which, people often have a kind of outside of the kink community, people express shame about some of their kinky fantasies and wonder, how does this fit in with sex? This doesn't seem like sex. And basically, it is sex. We can't just say that sex is just a behavioral that's a function of our genitals, and it's actually a spectrum and a scope of our erotic expression. And so anything that we eroticize has a kind of trail that leads back to these pathogenic beliefs that we carry around in ourselves. So common expressions of that could be wanting to be tied up, because once we're tied up, we don't feel like we're too much anymore. We can relax and let go, or we don't have to caretake for that other person, or look, see, I didn't have to do this. This happened to me, or it can be any kind of thing like that. So those messages are buried in there. So if you have a specific fantasy, I would encourage you just to, like let's say you have a really peak exciting fantasy that comes to you over and over again. I would encourage you to write it out and really look at what's happening in that fantasy. So here's one of mine that kind of comes up sometimes. Like I have this kind of fantasy about being like ravaged and being like the center of attention. And, in my real actual sex life, or in my real actual personal life beyond sexual behavior, sometimes it's really hard it's often quite hard actually to accept attention, or to accept energy coming towards me. Or maybe so you can kind of see the differential in like, here I am in the fantasy. We often change ourselves in our fantasies to reflect something about ourselves that we want to become, or that, that we're wanting to rectify or kind of solve a problem. So for me, here's where this map idea comes in. If in my fantasy, I'm like, really empowered, and I'm really carrying a lot of energy, and I'm really allowing all this energy to come towards me, well, that kind of shows me like, how do I actually get to that? Because my own self is maybe inhibited and struggles to show up in a certain kind of way. So I can extract from that fantasy the specific skills that I might need to really walk into the fullness of my expression. And if we start looking at our fantasies like that, we move beyond this notion of, should I act it out? Should I not? Because often we might act out a fantasy and it might feel like really sucky and it didn't land how we wanted it to. Well, it's not necessarily because we didn't select like the right objects to have sex with. It's often because that those dynamics that we're looking to solve, or that we're looking to express of ourselves, are not present. Just because we arrange the certain bodies that we like, or that we arrange the certain props, doesn't mean that we're going to activate that dynamic within ourselves. So that for me, the true work is really looking like at all of our fantasies, whether they be erotic or non, and look into like, well, what is this telling me? What is this pulling me towards? What dynamic does this express about my fundamental nature that I am really seeking to work out, and I'm trying my hardest to work out on this planet? And if you look at all of your fantasies, you'll see both a problem and a solution that you're trying to work with and navigate. I hope that's a helpful tip. If you like this and you'd like to do a little more of this kind of work, feel free to reach out to me via email. It's finn@finndeerhart.com, FINNDEERHART.com. And certainly there are so many books and resources out there about our erotic minds. I want to just say there's no reason to feel any kind of shame or fear about your fantasies, no matter what it is, even if it's a transgressive fantasy, because at the heart of our transgressive fantasies lies a power dynamic that we're trying to work out. It doesn't necessarily mean that we are really wanting what the fantasy might present on the surface. It really is more about what we're trying to solve in our own selves. So I hope that's helpful. I would love to hear feedback, constructive feedback, or how this might have helped you, or do any kind of session work with you too. You can also go to my website, www.finndeerhart.com.